Welcome to the premiere episode of Talk Digital, where we explore the latest industry news and have an open conversation with leaders and experts that are shaping the space. I'm your host, YJ, and today we're talking about a major shift happening across the CTV landscape. Over the past few months, it feels like nearly every major piece of marketing news has involved some form of CTV partnership acquisition or platform expansion, such as Walmart acquiring Vive or Pinterest moving into CTV through TV Scientific and Fox and Roku deal, of course, that brought so much attention to our industry. These are very different companies, but they all seem to be pointing to the same direction. So to help us unpack what's happening and what it means for advertisers, today I'm joined by Tom Burke, our Chief Revenue Officer at AI Digital. Tom, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure. I think there's a couple things happening. I think when you look at what Amazon specifically has done to push the industry and attribution forward, they've done a really good job owning the entire ecosystem from both demand to supply and kind of wrapping all that up in attribution. And we're starting to see a lot of other companies follow suit. So Amazon obviously started as a retail company. As they started to release things like Prime, and they are paying really close attention to consumer journeys across the Amazon platforms, and especially across Amazon DSP, they're able to consolidate that whole consumer journey, and you can click and buy anytime. So a consumer journey that was once linear, where you see something on TV, you then see a billboard, and then you walk into a store, that whole consumer journey has been collapsed. So as far as like what we're seeing now happen on things like Prime, you can get an ad for something like Bose headphones. You can click there and add them to your cart. And I think what's happening is a lot of these companies, specifically companies with interesting assets, are starting to follow suit. So Walmart, for example, has an amazing asset in Walmart's data, and they have so many retail locations. For them to be able to acquire something like Vizio and then acquire something like Vibe, they can all of a sudden build that full infrastructure, right? So you could see an ad on a Vizio TV that's being served through something like a Vibe. And then if you go back in store on Walmart.com or in store and buy, all of a sudden that's something that you can attribute back. And so I think we're seeing this rush of companies trying to own the whole infrastructure. Same thing with Fox, right? The Fox Roku merger. Fox now all of a sudden has more infrastructure to drive their content forward, right? And so people are trying to own the whole thing from supply to demand so that they can tell a good story, but they can own everything across the board.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really good point about owning a consumer journey, because then that now allows advanced targeting capabilities and measurement capabilities, right? Because everything is consolidated into a single centralized space.
Completely. And television was always branding. Like we were talking a lot about performance TV recently, and television was always branding, mainly because, of course, it's an immersive experience and it is great for branding, but because there was no real action someone could take. Like now you can literally click to buy on a TV ad, and all of a sudden that collapses that whole consumer journey. You don't have to stay as top of mind and walk into a store anymore. And so this idea of performance TV and upper funnel tactics becoming more performance driven, I think we're going to continue to see.
Yeah, and in a way, it's giving a lot of great advantage back to the advertisers, control back to the advertisers, because now they can see that kind of one-to-one match in terms of activation, audience, and sales. But at the same time, I feel like we've seen this through Google and now Amazon and Facebook and Meta are we giving too much control to these platforms? And is this kind of feeding into the walled garden environment? And what are the implications of it?
Yeah, it's early to tell with stuff like Fox and Roku. So, on the surface, everything that's being said is that Roku will stay agnostic and all that. I think anytime a company owns a piece of inventory or owns a piece of data, there becomes inherent bias there. The second that there's a piece of inventory or a piece of data that's more profitable than the open ecosystem, that platform, that supply path becomes a little bit biased, right? We saw that a lot with the Google trials, however long ago that was. So I think that's something we always have to keep in mind. When you're buying through a platform or you're kind of understanding a certain ecosystem, what inventory they own, what data they own, is that becoming a big walled garden? Because even on the attribution side of things, if you're running on, something like an Amazon or something like Walmart, you're only attributing within that walled garden, right? So it's how do you take a holistic view to understand the consumer attention holistically? How do you understand data and inventory holistically? How do you understand attribution holistically? Like that's challenging, right? When you're kind of operating in these multiple walled gardens.
Absolutely. And I think AI Digital's positioned very well, especially with being an agnostic partner. But obviously for agencies, advertisers who are looking to activate, it's not to say each platform has very clear advantages of activating? How do we offer and maintain an agnostic approach to ensure that we're meeting high level business objectives versus just being spending all of our revenue within, 1 to 2 platforms?
The real answer is we do it through a lot of hard work. Like our team is always trying to understand what platforms are out there, what are the technical advantages, and what are the evolutions within these platforms. We're trying to understand what are the shortest supply paths, what's going to drive, what data is going to give the best holistic view of the consumer, what's going to drive the best outcome. There's a lot of challenges there. From a company perspective, we have a philosophy called Open Garden, and what that means is we're truly agnostic to every platform, every data provider, every LLM on the space. And so when we're building recommendations, we can essentially use our technology Elevate to understand where's the best data, where's the best inventory, what's the best media mix, and how's it going to drive that outcome. So our whole approach is to stay agnostic so we can build the best possible plans.
This Elevate seems very cool, and I would love to understand, because the industry challenge is that obviously there's a lot of fragmentation. You're getting data from different sources, and transparency has always been a big challenge within the CTV space, right? So do you have any input there in terms of how Elevate can support CTV transparency?
Yeah, completely. Elevate to us a full agentic co-pilot from all the way from early stage planning and concepting all the way through to insights. And so for us, when a buyer is in a platform doing competitive research, building personas, it's important that we have all the data in there that allows agents to really build this so that people can make the best decisions on their media mixes. Once we're in market and we're executing, like we talked about earlier, we're executing agnostically. So we make sure that we're building the best plans across the best inventory sources. And in CTV, that's really hard. Like there's a lot of walled gardens and there's a lot of premium publishers when you start to think about Netflix and Prime and Peacock and Hulu and Disney. All those sit behind big walled gardens. And so for us, we always want to execute agnostically across all of them. And then we actually bring those insights back into Elevate. And so for a buyer and for a partner of ours who's using Elevate, they're able to plan up front and see a full kind of understanding of who their consumer is. We're able to build plans agnostically across the whole space. And then from an insights perspective, we're able to bring all that insights transparently back into the platform. So that's the main goal of it.
I love that. And that reminds me, when I was on the buy side working for an agency, we always had trouble working within Google and trying to figure out, because they'll never tell you should invest in Meta or you should invest in Fox. It's very within their system. So having a centralized agnostic platform that helps you manage smarter media buying, I think that's key.
For sure. And a lot of the platforms are moving towards even more of a black box methodology, which is like, hey, give us your outcome, give us your creative, and let us do the rest. Brand perception and strategy is so important. And so as things become more agentic and as technology advancements become even further down the line, to understand how to make a connection between a consumer and a brand, that's just authentically human. Like that's like, what is the strategy to make that connection and drive an outcome? So we want to empower our partners to do more of that type of work, and then we can execute across the whole ecosystem.
Tom, thank you so much, as always, for a great conversation. All these moves give advertisers easier and more consolidated access to CTV, but I think the bigger question here for all of us to consider is, what are the trade-offs that come with convenience and whether it ultimately lead to even more fragmentation for the market? Thanks again, Tom, and thank you for listening to the premiere episode of Talk Digital. We'll see you guys next time.